Hello there ladies and gentlemen, TX141 here, also known as Paul, welcoming you to an all-new Ace in a Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode we shall be reviewing the Mitsubishi A6M5 Reisen, a Japanese naval fighter coming at a tier of 3 and a battle rating of 4.7. To kickstart our historical overview, we must roll back to the middle of 1942 and realise the momentum shift in the favour of the Americans in the Pacific. What with the conclusion of the Battle of Coral Sea as of May 1942, and a month later the Battle of Midway. Compound to this the fact that the American second generation of fighter aircraft was now being introduced by the start of 1943, most notably the P-38 Lightning and the F-4U Corsair, and this meant that the air supremacy that the A6M series of fighter aircraft was enjoying was now beginning to fade. And this was added to by the technical failure of the A6M3 variant in 1942. Meaning that the Japanese Naval Air Force required a very quick replacement to the Zero, or at least an upgraded variant. This was of course to take shape in the A6M5 Model 52, with the initial prototype being a converted A6M3 that was designed and developed over the first half of 1943. The project was no longer being supervised by the original chief designer of the Reisen, Jiro Horikoshi, who had now begun work on the successor to the Zero, the J2M Raiden. This role was now being fulfilled instead by Majiro Takahashi. In order to create the A6M5, the same Nakajima Sake 21 radial engine with an output of 1130 horsepower was used. However, individual exhaust stacks were now employed in order to maximise the top speed of the plane. On top of this, the same basic fuselage as before was implemented, yet a shorter wingspan was introduced, with the wingspan now being 11 metres versus the 12 metre wingspan on the A6M2 variant, with rounded wingtips being retained from the A6M3 Model 22. The wing folding mechanism was removed and the ailerons were shifted into the outer board wingtip. In order to maintain the range with reduced wingspan, a main central fuselage fuel tank was introduced, along with 4 fuel tanks in each wing, and then the fuel tank in the wingtips, as taken over from the A6M3 Model 22. The wing skinning was boosted to improve the top dive speed, and the plane was to use the same armament as from the A6M3 Model 22. 2 7.7mm Type 97 machine guns based above the engine, and 2 20mm Type 99 Mark II cannons, one to each wing. In all, this meant that the Zero's top speed was now 565 km an hour, with a top dive speed of 660 km an hour, and a range of approximately 1,171 miles. Despite the plane being 200 kg heavier than the base A6M3 variant, its significant improvements, as highlighted in the first test flight as of August 1943, meant that the plane was rushed into production and the first combat-ready units were being rolled out by the start of autumn 1943. The plane, interestingly enough, was to be introduced at the same time as its equal on the battlefield, the F6F Hellcat, with the two planes having their vices and virtues but being very closely contended. This meant that the plane was to see relative success up against the increasing odds of improved American fighter aircraft, which technically began to outclass the Zero in most regards, bar perhaps agility down at lower altitudes. The A6M5 was to be produced right up to the end of the war in the Pacific, with a total of over 6,000 A6M5s in all variants, including the base variant, the Ko, the Otsu and the Hei, being produced, and Japan never finding a true replacement to what was to become the definitive variant of the Zero. So our historical outlook concluded, let us see how the A6M5 Model 52 handles in War Thunder. Ergo, our gameplay for today is taken from the ground strike map Caucasus, using the following setup. Omni-Purpose belts for our 7.7s, the reasoning here is that whilst the effectiveness of the machine guns is limited, the mixture of tracer, armour-piercing and adjustment incendiary rounds can bolster this to some extent. On top of this we are using Omni-Purpose belts for our 20mm cannons, as 3 of the 4 rounds here are high explosive in nature, allowing for a spread of damage when incident on an enemy aircraft's fuselage. The 4th and final round is an armour-piercing incendiary round, with the contrasting effect of providing more concentrated damage on an enemy aircraft's engines or fuel tanks, whereby when instant they may have the chance of setting the fuel tanks on fire and causing the plane to burn to death. We bring this all together with a 400 meter gun convergence, as our playstyle is going to be essentially turn and burn and stall fighting, with the intention of forcing our opponents to overshoot or hang out in front of us at distances of 300 to 500 meters, and a 400 meter gun convergence will work very well to this effect. Finally, we are using a 45-minute fuel load, as this is the lightest we can take, and one that will provide us with the capacity to last to the end of the game in terms of fuel span. Nonetheless, with our setup concluded, let us begin this review by taking into account what the A6M5 represents in terms of its battle rating of 4.7 and as a variant of the Zero line. And we do this by taking a look at a 2 vs 1 dogfight against a G2 and an F4, both variants of the Messerschmitt 109, with the G2 coming at us in the head on, and we decide to snap rail out of the way. The F4 meanwhile has knocked out a friendly aircraft, and we decide to exact revenge by taking advantage of their oblivious nature to our presence. However, this has to be done quickly because the G2 is coming around for a second burst, and this time we go into a spiral roll, whilst at the same time dodging their incoming fire and exacting a set of scissors, forcing the G2 to overshoot eventually thanks to their superior engine power and the fact that we have greater manoeuvrability and agility with lower speeds. The G2 eventually comes out in front of us and we may achieve our second kill. And so hopefully that initial episode has already shown one key factor within this gameplay, and therefore the review of the A6M5 as a result. Is this not rather reminiscent of a previous iteration of the Zero that was long in the past? The battle rating 3.7 A6M2 variant, whereby we originally classed it in our review as the plane that is agile but fragile. And with the manoeuvrability we just exhibited there, this is a major echo of that plane. Nonetheless, here we are about to take a major gamble against the Junkers 87D variant, whereby we conclude that because the Junkers 87 has not dived on us yet, it is most likely a D3 rather than a D5 with the 20mm cannons, the D3 bearing a pair of 7.92mm machine guns. Our durability is rather limited, yet very low caliber machine guns do not have that much of a damaging effect. As a result, we can absorb the incoming fire and begin to climb up underneath the D3 thanks to our brilliant overall climb rate, and knock them out for our third kill. However, when we discuss our climb rate, we have to consider it is not brilliant in terms of the amount of altitude we can gain within a short space of time. That trophy goes to planes such as the Focke-Wulf 190D9 and the F8F-1 Bearcat. Instead, we're talking about the fact that over the long distance we can gain altitude rather gradually, whereby we also have the ability to maximise our acceleration, which is great within a speed range of 200 to 375 km an hour, in order to continually climb and exhibit new climb strategies within a short space of time, by comparison with planes such as this Focke-Wulf 190A5 we're about to encounter. Nonetheless, here we break out to the side and then cut across their line of fire before looping over the top, or rolling over the top I should say. We come out underneath the A5, and as they try and break around, we can knock them out for our fourth kill. So as we break away and take note of the two Focke-Wulf 190s, one trying to gum up against our P39K and the other one also exhibiting within the same space, we now come back to the point concerning the climb rate. Much like in the Model 22 review, when we say we have a decent climb rate over long distance, we mean that we can go into multiple climb sets within a short space of time, i.e. the time between the sets. With planes such as the Focke-Wulf 190A5, the climb needs to be initiated at a speed of 400 km an hour, and this takes a while to build up to. So therefore we have an advantage in the long haul. And now fortunately for us, a Yak 9T is dispatched one of the Focke-Wulf 190As, and the second one is now being pursued by a friendly Spitfire, which means we can gradually make our way over towards the enemy territory. Here we note two Messerschmitt 109s gradually climbing up, but not directly towards us, and one of them is encroaching upon 2 km or less below us, and so we decide here to try and dive on them. Although this is going to act as an example of the poor boom and zoom style nature of the A6M5, especially over long distance at extreme speed, whereby eventually the 109F decides to pursue a target that we cannot chase after because of their high speed within a dive. And so here we decide to pursue a P39K Airacobra, masking our intentions by pretending to go after a P63, but at the same time also highlighting that the control surfaces are locking up at a speed of 700 km an hour. We managed to set the P39K on fire, but we did not have the ability to rotate our wings enough in order to dispatch them efficiently, meaning that we picked up an assist. And so in terms of an analysis and controllability, the control surfaces of this plane in general begin to lock up at a speed of 650 km an hour, with the lockup being maximised at 725 km an hour and being incredibly risky, One important thing to note is the elevator control surface, whereby below an altitude of 1000 meters and at a speed of 600 km an hour or more, the elevator freezes immensely, and this means you have to be very careful when being close to the ground in a dive of being able to pull up in time, as I have found out on multiple occasions when I've put this plane into a mountain on maps such as Gorge. In this instance we were trying to get away from an enemy LA5, and whilst we could not outrun them, we had enough distance and time between our two planes converging in order to lure them into the friendly spawn space and have a Yak-19 knock them out for us. We then begin to initiate a very gradual long distance climb, in order to emphasise our rather overemphasised point concerning the climb rate from earlier, as we look for a new target. We can see a Yak-9 charging into the battlefield, but they are going in a completely different direction to us, and so we begin to take note of the planes that are up at higher altitudes on the enemy team that are masked rather severely by the sunlight. It's at this point that we come into the overall altitude performance of the A6M5, whereby despite the lack of a climb rate by comparison with the rest of your battle rate and contemporaries, this plane handles very well up to an altitude of 6000 meters, at which point the overall performance of the plane begins to gradually ease off, meaning that you will be at a severe disadvantage by comparison with your high altitude opponents. As a result, keeping within an altitude range of say 2000 to 5000 meters altitude is always advisable, but especially within the range of 2000 to 3000 meters, as this plane handles very nicely within those sections of the airspace. We know an enemy Typhoon, Messerschmitt 109 and Focke-Wulf 190 all coming out of the spawn directly towards us, and at 4 kilometers away on average we have to turn and break away. And this is crucial to the nature of the A6M5 and its survivability. You always have to think at least one step in advance of what you would normally think, because by the time you have made your decision in this plane, your opponents will be at 1 kilometer or more closer to you, especially in situations such as that if we had decided to turn at say 3 kilometers instead of 4. And so this is something to be wary of by comparison with the faster planes you may fly. We know here that the enemy Typhoon and Focke-Wulf 190 are both climbing after our friendly Wellington, who is going to act as the perfect bait here, but something we cannot capitalise on at the same time, and this is because of our low top speed. For reference, the arcade top speed of this plane is 591 km an hour, according to the charts. This is on average at least 100 if not 150 km an hour less by comparison to the rest of the planes at your battle rating, or slightly higher, with this game exhibiting a battle rating set up at least 5.0 if not 5.3. And this means that when enemy fighters are attacking friendly bombers, or vice versa, it is very difficult to catch up to targets rapidly, as we are going to exhibit even further later on in this game, or rather shortly in fact. In the meantime we have retreated to our own friendly spawn space and airfield in order to gain altitude, because here we are going to take a long distance approach of gradually making our way over to the higher altitude spaces around the enemy territory by coming in from a long distance, and this means that we can eventually provide bomber escort, or fighter escort I should say, to the B-17, which is approximately 9.5 kilometers away at the moment. We know a Junkers 88 coming from the enemy spawn directly to bomb one of our friendly bases. It is the leftmost one, and now we exhibit the lack of overall speed having a major effect at intercepting enemy bombers. The Junkers 88 has had at least one run on the base, being able to turn away from us at 3.5 kilometers and being able to set up their next run. The enemy SM-79 however is going to exhibit a secondary point, and that is bombers can even see this plane as quite an easy target, with the frontal 12.7mm machine gun of the SM-79 being used to effect by their pilot very shortly to try and hit us. So we're going to use the same approach as with the Focke-Wulf 190 A5, cut out on one side and then cut around in front of their line of fire before they can change direction and react to us. This means that we can force the SM-79 pilot to have to stall out in front of us or fly level at low speed. And, as we do it here, we cut our engine to ensure the perfect shot and pick up our ace in a day. So this is something to be rather cautious of. Enemy bombers, whether they have frontal guns, which are controlled by the pilot, or just turrets, they may see you as an easy target, and so be wary of those head-to-heads. Although, against those bombers with turrets, it may be your best option, rather than bumping into a line of fire from their tail section, as with a B-17. Here we now attack the Junkers 88 from earlier, who has had a second successive bombing run on our leftmost base. We knock them out for our 6th kill, but they have already done the significant damage required. And here we see another Junkers 87D variant, and we can straight away conclude by the fact they've decided to go head on at a distance of 2 kilometers that this is a D5 with 20mm cannons, and so we snap roll out of the way using our great agility and manoeuvrability, forcing the D5 to come out behind us and cut into another scissors section much like the ones engaged with the G2 from earlier, the Messerschmitt-19 for our second kill. We gain the upper hand here, but the D5 is rather durable, and we're going to need multiple bursts and some a little bit more accurate shooting in order to knock them out, setting them on fire for our 7th kill. Although we should be aware at this point that if the D5 had been able to start diving away from us, we may not have been able to catch them in the long run due to our limited top dive speed, despite the fact that this plane was aimed at improving its dive speed historically. Nonetheless, with another kill in the bag, we begin to fly over towards the enemy spawn point in order to suppress the altitude cap that the enemy team can exhibit, or inhabit I should say. We see a TU2 however beforehand, and we have to deal with this, and with two 20mm cannons in their nose, the TU2 is going to go for a head-on. But here we cut underneath their elevator space, meaning they do not have the controllability to bring their guns to bear, and we cut incredibly close to their right hand side, meaning that we can force them to come out in front of us and set them on fire in 3 different locations. This will eventually lead to another kill. At this point we come around and make sure to keep an eye on the planes below us, as at an altitude of 3,800 metres and with the enemy spawn at approximately 1,800 metres, planes can climb very quickly that 2 kilometres distance, and we need to be wary of this, especially if they are flying planes such as the Spitfire LF Mark 9 and perhaps even the Focke-Wulf 90 D9. We dive down on a climbing Spitfire Mark 5B trop in order to pick up our 9th kill, and continue to climb up towards the higher altitude spaces. We need to stay away from the enemy spawn and keep at least a 2 kilometres distance at all points, whilst providing this altitude suppression cap. We see an enemy Focke-Wulf 90 off in the distance engaging with some friendly fighters, and then we notice an enemy Wellington just coming out of the spawn. Pardon me. Our intention here is not to attack the Wellington, because we do not have the ability to gamble on the Wellington being the appropriate target, when we have enemy fighters that could come out of the spawn and charge us rather rapidly, as we are going to see with an enemy LA5 very shortly. And this means that the Wellington can gradually make their way across the map as we have to deal with foes who can outperform us in the vertical. The LA5 makes a very early charge and as a result causes themselves to stall out at approximately 1.1 kilometers distance. This means that we can now come out, over and underneath in order to try and attack them whilst they begin to head down towards lower altitudes, and we achieve a critical hit on their right wing, and as we begin to enunciate our words better here, we know that eventually they will have to land to repair or crash into the ground for another kill. We look around and see that the Wellington is still plodding along, and we also note a Messerschmitt-19 that has come out of its spawn point and is gradually trying to climb off to the side of the map, and this is now our next target, although we're going to make it look as though we are perhaps trying to judge whether to attack the Wellington or not, to provide a little bit of indecisiveness. Soon our fears are declared though, and this Messerschmitt-19 F2 is coming up for us, and having gone out to the side they have the engine power and the speed in order to attack us head on sufficiently. And so here we decide to do a small split S and then cut out the other side of their line of fire. This means that we can dodge all the incoming fire of their lethal 15mm heavy machine gun and force them to come out underneath us at very low speed and allow us to secure our double ace. Once again we are relying on the fact that our opponents do not have the controllability or control surfaces to react to the fact we cut across their line of fire or underneath it as rapidly as we can do so. It is very risky, and with planes with sufficient spread on their guns, such as the Focke-Wulf 90 A8 with its 4 20mm cannons in the wings, this can be rather lethal to our own aircraft, but it is a risk we are willing to take with the confidence we have in the manoeuvrability of this aircraft. We secure our 11th kill finally on that LA5F from earlier, and we now begin to proceed away from the enemy spawn section and enemy territory in order to see if there are other enemy opponents who may climb up towards us, as we do not want to give off the presence that we are continually spawn camping. We see that the Spitfire is climbing up towards us, or at least climbing at a rather rapid rate, and so we begin to make our way over, and perhaps note that they may not be trying to climb directly for us anymore, having instead been consigned to the fact they will need to exhibit the lower altitude space, or inhibit it I should say once again, until we begin to fade away. The enemy Focke-Wulf 90A from earlier has been knocked out by a friendly Yak 3, and so at this point we can turn our attentions once again to anything that is incoming. This time it's a Dornier 217. So, whilst we begin our approach on the Dornier 217 who is going to stall out underneath us and make for a rather easy clean kill, let us consider the overall controllability of this plane in terms of its turn circle and characteristics of all the other control surfaces. The turn circle of this plane is essentially the best in class for its battle rating, whereby the turn circle is slightly better than the A6M3 Mod 22, and this means we are looking at the ultimate turn fighter in the horizontal. Bar say the Junkers A7M5 or G2, when it is employing landing flaps where the planes become rather similar. Nonetheless, this plane with its acceleration being maximum at 200 to 375 km an hour means that it can pick up speed rather rapidly in the slow speed space or slow speed sphere, making it ideal for those basic turn fights. We also have to consider the rudder is incredibly powerful, much akin to that on say a P-39 Aerocobra, and so this means you can always change your direction and initiate snap rolls with relative ease, thanks to the decent roll rate also coming in handy, despite the lock-up at 600 km an hour to 650 km an hour coming into effect, and a rather noticeable one at a rapid rate. The elevators are also rather responsive, although as discussed earlier, we have to be careful of the fact that below 1000 meters altitude and at a speed of 600 km an hour, the elevators begin to seize. And we are left here with a slight impasse. We've got two enemy fighters left on the enemy team, a Messerschmitt 109 and a Spitfire, and they are much lower altitude than us, so we are once again going to see how our weak boom and zoom ability over long distance and high speed is going to compromise our ability to hit either target, even if we cut out either engine. And at the same time, we do not want to risk an approach which is over longer distance and whereby we come out at an angle and come in at a more gradual dive. The reason here is because it is a 2 versus 1, and just in case anything comes out the spawn point at a later date. Nonetheless, our friendly Yak 3 has been able to dispatch the Messerschmitt 109F before being shot down by the enemy Spitfire. And at this point we begin to break away, because we need the Spitfire to come away from the spawn point, just in case anything else comes out. And very shortly we're going to be checking the score screen to see if the enemy team have got another German fighter coming our way. We note it's a Dornier 217J1, so we were rather fortunate and smart to play it that way, because otherwise we may have been trying to get an upper hand on the Spitfire, only to have the J1 Dornier 217 variant come around with its 420mm cannons and dispatch us accordingly. And with our very fragile airframe which can soak up low caliber machine gun fire only really, it would only be a matter of time before we would be a burning wreck in the ground. Another key item to note therefore on this plane is the fact that its durability and flammability are two questionable aspects. If this plane is hit by 20mm cannon rounds, it will very quickly lose control surfaces, whereby the rounders only have to hit the fuselage for an aileron tab to come flying off. Additionally, main hits to the fuselage or the wings in turn will lead to this plane catching fire rather rapidly, especially armor-piercing incendiary tracer rounds from the American 50 cals or armor-piercing incendiary rounds from 20mm cannons, or even the high-explosive incendiary rounds of a German 20mm Mausler cannon. And so getting hit is the ultimate danger in this plane. Yet, in order to catch our kills, we need to get as close as possible, and bear the lines of fire nonetheless. It's at this point, having broken away from the enemy team, at approximately a distance of 6 km that we come around. We notice the Spitfire is going to change direction very shortly and begin to pursue our friendly Year 2. Although we are not going to give up our tactic here of pursuing the Dornier 217 down at lower altitudes. They may be bearing bombs, and so we need to eliminate them accordingly in order to make sure we can win the game. The Spitfire here turns away and goes after the Year 2, as perhaps expected, and so, gradually pursuing the Spitfire in order to give off our intentions in the wrong manner, we keep an eye on the Dornier 217 and begin to shift our focus, as once we have dispatched them, our two bombers can eliminate the enemy airfield, and we can just fly off to the side or gradually pursue the Spitfire over long distance, despite our disparity in top speed. The Dornier 217 is now too far for the Spitfire to intervene, and so we can take a similar approach to the one from earlier, coming down directly on top of it as it stalls out underneath us, trying to bear their cannons onto our fuselage, but at the same time not having the engine performance to continue to climb up underneath us, meaning that we can split S on top of them and knock them out for what will be our 13th and final kill for this game. Unfortunately, as per the usual with our 13th kill, we are unlucky not to go any further, with the Spitfire having superior performance to us in the vertical in terms of climb and top speed, and we have to try and request our friendly Year 2 to bring the Spitfire to us. It is an ultimate frustration, but nonetheless one that we will have to deal with, and something we have learnt from flying the other Zero variants. We now see that the Spitfire is the only plane left on the enemy team, and with our two bombers gradually dropping the bombs onto the enemy airfield, it is only a time before the Spitfire is brought to us by a bomber, or we win the game through bomb payloads. We climb rather rapidly here, and thanks to our stall speed being at approximately 150 km an hour, we're able to exact very steep climbs in order to gain altitude rapidly. Although again, this is not in the same calibre of climb rate as the Spitfire, which I believe is a Spitfire LF Mark 9 here, or just a basic Mark 9 variant. Nonetheless, we win the game, and as a result, let us take a look at the post-game stats. Hence, we can see that our 13 kills and single assist allowed us to obtain 79,860 silver lines and 4,644 research points, all going towards our continued research on the J2M3, and we have to consider that these values are thanks to a premium account as well. We hereby conclude our review of the A6M5 Reisen by realising that this plane sacrifices the versatility offered in the A6M3 and its subsequent variants, and focuses on the agility and manoeuvrability of the A6M2 back at a battle rating of 3.7 and exploits it to maximum effect at a battle rating of 4.7. This plane bears the tightest turn circle in class, and thanks to the combination of a great rudder response, decent roll rate and decent elevators, it can outmaneuver any foe it faces in a 1 vs 1 and gradually gain a gun solution, at which point the opponent will either be slaughtered or have to dive down to lower altitudes where the A6M5 cannot follow due to its limited top speed and limited dive speed. By exploiting this and the fact that this plane has a climb rate which is only useful over long distance, and the fragile nature of this plane, although a rather flammable one as well, this plane can be beaten quite easily. Planes such as the Focke-Wulf 190 D9 and the Spitfire Mark 9 will be able to outclimb this fighter aircraft in a stroke, and then bear down in a very aggressive head-on approach with 20mm cannons or higher caliber, or alternatively continue to make loop dives on this plane, whereby attacking it and forcing it to outmaneuver your firepower means that eventually the A6M5 pilot will have to stall out or dive down to lower altitudes. Additionally, a 2 vs 1 or multiple vs 1 engagement, as used by the American pilots in the Pacific, is a very advisable tactic to bring a sole A6M5 down, as a 1 vs 1 engagement is easy for this aircraft, but a concentrated 2 or more vs 1 engagement is very difficult to manage in the long run, even for the most experienced pilot. Nonetheless, by exploiting the main strengths of this plane, we were able to come first by comparison to the rest of our team, gradually taking down the enemy fighters and ensuring that our bombers were able to hit the bases in the long haul, even if we had to think 4 steps ahead of our opponents and ahead of ourselves in order to maximise our survivability and gradually build up the kill count, eventually securing the win. As a result, if you are looking for the ultimate turn fighter within the Japanese lineup, then look no further, because this variant of the Reisen takes it from 0 to hero. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. Yet until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies!